0.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the DevOps Enterprise Summit live chat. We are assembled here today with a group of people I've known for years and people who I genuinely admire. They're all experts and leaders in the DevOps Enterprise community who are helping shape so much of the practices that are going to almost certainly be commonplace in technology organizations over the next decade. From my perspective, over the last 20 years, I've been studying high-performing technology organizations. And more recently, it's led to studying transformational leaders and trying to understand how they became transformational leaders. What I find so fascinating is there's evidence to suggest that these are traits that you're not necessarily born with, but instead they're actually learned. So over the next hour, my goal is to learn about these leaders on this panel, their careers and experiences that shaped who they are today. My desired outcome is that we'll all learn something that we can integrate into our own respective journeys. And as you'll surely find out over the next hour, these are all great people. So as a reminder, the upcoming DevOps Enterprise San Francisco event is taking place on November 13th to the 15th. And for more information, visit events.itrevolution.com. And just a reminder, early bird pricing ends on July 31st. So let's go quickly around the panel. And everyone, if you could just introduce yourselves, name, company, role. When did you present DevOps Enterprise and what did you speak on? And if you could just briefly share any the professional accomplishment that you're most proud of. Dominica DeGranz, let's start with you.
All right. Well, I was a build engineer, spent 20 years bringing visibility to what version of what file was on what server and what environment, and when it went to prod, and automating and deployments and whatnot. Currently, I'm director of training and coaching at Linkit. I've spoken at DevOps Enterprise Summit for 4 years in a row now. Mostly speak about experience reports and metrics and making things visible. And I guess my most professional accomplishment, I think it would have to be finding my courage to get up in front of a group of people and explain or present data and demonstrate why, and try, getting leadership buy-in, I think, with metrics.
Awesome. Thank you. Erica Morrison.
Hi, everyone. I'm Director of Software Development and Operations at CSG International in Omaha. We've spoken the past couple years at DevOps Enterprise Summit, chronicling our journey through the DevOps space, and we'll continue to tell that journey. Something that I'm most proud of. Probably the things that have brought the most challenges in my career have actually been in the DevOps space, and we've undergone a fairly major transformation this past year. Brought a number of teams through that, but one team in particular, we've made substantial improvements as far as stability and automation. So that's been really something that's been fun to be a part of.
By the way, following your experience reports, the Scott crew has been my favorite among every year at DevOps Enterprise. Fantastic. Robin.
Hey, I'm Robin Yeben, a Lockheed Martin fellow. Been working in engineering about 23 years in the defense industry on everything from submarines to satellites and everything in between. I think my biggest accomplishment is really being able to see the change, right? So when we first started doing Agile and DevOps, you really couldn't see it. But now I start getting contracts and RFPs from the customer, kind of repeating verbatim what I told them before. So it's cool to see that the influence is there. Might not be as fast as I'd like it, but it's there.
That's awesome. And then you spoke last 2 years at DevOps Enterprise, San Francisco and
you're right.
London.
Yep, the last 2 years on transforming large legacy organizations with so a combination between Suzette Johnson from Northrop Grumman and myself from Lockheed Martin, because we both had very similar journeys.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin. Nicole.
Yes. Hello. I'm Nicole Forsgren, CEO and Chief Scientist at DevOps Research and Assessment, otherwise known as DORA. So my background is I spent years doing software development, enterprise storage at IBM, and then I went and got my PhD. So that might be my professional accomplishment that I'm most proud of, is that I've been studying and researching what's basically known as DevOps for the last 10 years, and then applying it and bringing what I found to industry and in my work with Eugene and Jez Humble and the team at Puppet on the State of DevOps report, and really helping to make an impact in academia, but most importantly to me in industry, right? So we all kind of lived through that 2000 dot-com bust, and we saw so many companies fail, and I don't want to see that again, right? So really helping to make an influence in the industry and make things a little bit better.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. And you've spoken, I think, also every year at DevOps Enterprise,
Yep.
primarily on the State of DevOps report. Fantastic. Terry Potts.
Hi, I'm Terry Potts. I'm from Raytheon Company, and I'm the technical director of the software development organization. So like Robin, we're focused on doing mostly defense and intel community related contracts. And, I started in the software development business, actually in the Air Force, and spent 11 years there, kind of moving through the ranks, and came to Raytheon and moved on to be an architect after doing development for several years, and have been a champion for technology transformation since the early 2000s. I've spoken a few times at DevOps Enterprise Summit, once about kind of our legacy transformation, since we have been around for so long and a lot of our code is quite old. And last year I spoke about how you train, how you build up your staff of people that can support your DevOps transformation, because it's so hard to just go out and hire those. So some ideas around how to go do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terry. And by the way, I remember meeting you at the IBM Interconnect conference in 2014, and you were actually one of the first announced speakers at DevOps Enterprise, so I'm very grateful for that. So the first question I have for all of you is, actually, let me just state an assumption I have, that there's actually never been a more fun time and exciting time to be in technology. Even though things are rapidly changing, actually that's the exact pace of change is what's causing so much maybe fear for so many professionals about our livelihoods, our vocations. But I genuinely believe that the best times are ahead of us, not behind us. Do you believe that? And if so, why? Erica, could we start with you?
Sure. So, I think about when I came out of college, a computer science degree, and, I was focused on writing one language and writing that language well. And now, we've got the proliferation of numerous different technologies, different languages. Like you said, the pace is moving much quicker. We actually hosted a hackathon here. We've done 2 of them for college students, and just a number of different technologies that they used was absolutely mind-blowing to me. But I find it extremely interesting to continue to evolve for all these different things. It's not just this one little dedicated space anymore, but it's constantly learning these new things, which I love to do. It's new challenges every day, which keeps work interesting for us. It makes work about being lifelong learners, right? So I lost my lights there. I don't know if you can still see me or not, but yes. But yeah, so I love that, continuing to learn throughout our career, and it's just focusing on learning different things now.
Awesome. I do remember that from my visit to CSG, the lights that always turned off. Robin, how about you?
So I absolutely agree. And if you like change, and I really like it, then I think it's the most exciting time. Just like she was saying, the college kids are coming in with 15, 20 different languages. They're bringing all kinds of new technologies. They're bringing gamification. They've really brought some different leadership styles. It's very exciting. I know that some of our engineers get nervous, but if you just grab on and join the ride, it's so fun.
Nicole. Oh, and you're muted.
I mute so I don't have background noise. Honestly, that's one thing I love about technology, right? I mean, it kept me engaged, it kept me excited. Back when I was doing a bunch of development work, there was always something new to work on. As you said, though, there's always that other piece, right? There's always the other side of it, and that's we're working in systems with growing complexity. And that does make it really, really difficult. And that's something that we're seeing when we work with companies with Dora in our assessment, right? Is you have to make sure that you can also focus, right? You need to know what your constraint is, particularly when we're working on technology transformations. We need to make sure we can focus on the most important thing. And I'm sure I can see Dominica smiling and nodding, right? We need to make sure that we can limit our WIP, we can focus on our constraints, we can identify what the most important thing is so that we don't have sprawl and just contribute to technical debt. But I also think that's what makes our work challenging and exciting and meaningful. So I love it.
Yeah. Terry, Dominica? Let's go Terry.
So I love change, and that's why my career has taken me where it has, because the more different things you get into, I think the more rounded you are, and the more you're able to adopt new technologies. So, and the way I see it today is all the technology change, especially with the automation, that many of us are going through that transformation. I have always sort of seen that as drudgery, right? If you're working in some factory, let's get rid of, let's automate all the drudgery out. And then that gives us time on our teams to explore more around analytics or machine learning, or, really push those technologies. So that's exciting for me.
And yet I suspect that, in your career, let me say this is the next question, but yes, you make it sound so exciting. Dominica, you're smiling.
Well, I'm just thinking back at my first job out of school after I got my computer science degree. Configuration management back then was getting everything on the mag tape from IBM and putting that in a library, a physical library somewhere safe in order to deploy it into production. So we knew that what went into prod was exactly what got deployed to QA. But I think for me, it's just the amount of opportunity there is now. There is this massive amount of opportunity for everyone, whether they have a degree in computer science or not, to go out there with all the sharing. The ability to share and learn now is so much greater than it has been previously.
That is so true, right? I mean, there's never been a better time to be a learner, right? There's no cost to entry, it seems, these days, right?
Absolutely.
So, I suspect that this isn't the first time that you've seen this kind of dramatic change in the industry in your career. I'd love it if you could just share, tell us about that time and how it affected your thinking about how you viewed your skills, your career, and where it took you. Robin, would you mind starting?
Sure. Let's see. When I first started, we had a lot of Fortran and Ada going on, and I was worried about the next generation of Ada and whether I'd even be able to keep up. So, just like Dominica and the rest of the folks have said, spent a lot of time at night trying to study, make sure I could stay on top of it, because I was working with these amazing engineers and I just didn't want to fall behind. I kind of do the same thing now.
And so give me a time frame on that, Robin, about the next generation of Ada. That was
so back ago? In the 90s,
90s right.
late 90s, my very first project was Seawolf submarine. So yeah, it's all in Ada.
Oh, and by the way, I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, what level of fear did you feel? 1 is like it's just another book, no fear. 10 is existential fear of I might not be able to finish the book and therefore my career is over.
So I work with the engineers, they're so smart that I was terrified. I'd say right up at the 8 or the 9, because like some people just get it so quick and I have to work at it. Like I'm just not a natural. So I was terrified.
Which is, by the way, it reminds me of learning Clojure very recently. It was my first Lisp language, and I think I had to do 40 hours of reading before I could write a single line of code. It was just it was very challenging, but very rewarding, but also a little very intimidating. Nicole, how about you?
So my first job in tech was when I was still in college, and it was on a mainframe, right? So I was coming out of my associates in like 99, and that was the big like Y2K, everyone was panicked. And it really like fundamentally shaped what I thought about tech in so many ways, because everyone was panicked. There was this big .com bust. And I alluded to this earlier, right? Is that, and you've said this before, Jean, you know, survival isn't mandatory. Companies can fail. And so that's one piece where it really shaped what I do, is that I don't want to see companies fail, right? People can, I'm sure y'all have talked to me at conferences and suddenly like I just dig in and I'm so passionate and you're probably like, stop talking, right? Like I have this drive to make sure we know we can find ways to help companies not fail. But it also like fundamentally affected me in a different way, in that in the late 90s, there was almost an only tactical way to address the problem. And it was teach everyone only fundamental things in, like, people look at me, they're like, how do you know mainframes, right? It was mainframe, COBOL, Fortran, and that was all we were teaching so many students, because we desperately had a very tactical need to make sure that like when we hit 2000, the world didn't end technologically. And then I did a bunch of consulting, I did a bunch of work, and then I went and got a PhD, and then I was a professor. And so we've almost taken this other stance of we only want to, or we're very purposeful now, and I think it's led to complexity sometimes in technology, that we want to make sure that we understand the purpose behind what we're doing, right? We want to make sure that we have flexibility, we're strategic, and we aren't just tactical. So even, you know, Jean, you know this, when we design the State of DevOps reports, they're vendor and tool agnostic. We tell you about the principles that are important, the architectural designs that are important, the principles behind using version control that are important. We aren't going to tell you to use Git or Subversion. We're going to tell you to use version control. And so that's the other thing that's really impacted my career, is that I need to make sure that if I walk into a situation, I can tell someone from a conceptual level what's really fundamentally important to improve their technology practice, and it won't be tied to only a specific technology, because that can end up being so limiting. If you only teach someone a language, but not the fundamentals behind that language.
Principles are timeless. Most things are not. Awesome. Terry.
When I think about this, the thing that comes to mind for me is probably about 20 years ago, when systems and software architecture started becoming a first-class citizen, and at least at Raytheon. And so I remember seeing the first book, and one of my mentors saying, hey, I'm going to have a study group on, you know, software architecture. Do you want to join? And I wanted to join, and started seeing it as a way to grow my career and be able to influence bigger parts of the system and try to make things more maintainable and really make good decisions going forward, instead of just sort of stumbling into things. So yeah, I wouldn't say I was afraid, but I was really curious, and certainly felt like it was something that I needed to keep up with, and did a lot of studying on my own outside of the office, or with study groups, learning everything I could about
software. That is really interesting. And in this case, it was like a mentor who actually sort of directed you down a certain direction.
Yes.
And who brought you in. Now that's super interesting. That seems to be a pattern, right? Is you know, having great mentors. Fantastic. Dominica.
But when it comes to dramatic change, I have to say, hands down, 2005, 2006. I was working at Corbis at the time, managing environments, and we went from building out and maintaining 25 servers to building out and maintaining 250 servers over a period of, you know, 9 to 12 months. So no longer, it was just impossible to manually build out servers. We had to start automating. And this was all, and then developers, because I used to deploy the integrated development environment too. And they were like, builds take too long, you know, well, and so they wanted to put their own changes in their own dev integrated environment. And there was, I took it seriously, but they, I said, okay, then you get to own that dev environment. Like, you build it, you maintain it, then I'll just go build out and maintain QA and staging and prod. And So that was huge, dramatic change, I think, and just being able to adapt to that and quickly was the biggest lesson for me there.
And specifically, was it dramatic because it was such a different way of doing things? It was dramatic because of the role change and responsibilities for you, or what made it so dramatic?
Because for the previous 6 years, we had this process where we, just roles and responsibilities, who's doing what and how we're doing it. And now that was turned on its head because we had to deliver faster. We had to deliver, better quality. We had to get these environments up and running, and everything just exponentially grew with the number of servers and the number of environments. And the way that I had been working for the last 6 years, which had been fairly successful, now was completely different. Like nothing stays the same, right? That's the second law of thermodynamics. Everything is always in constant change and motion.
I love it. This is a famous story that's in David J. Anderson's book and in your book, upcoming book, Dominica. Fantastic. And Erica, your dramatic changes in a certain point of your career.
So in addition to the ones that have been mentioned, a couple that come to mind for me, first of all, introduction of Agile. So started my career very waterfall. I probably wrote code for 3 to 6 months before I even checked it in to the point that other people were using it, which now is obviously kind of mind-blowing to us, but that's how we did software development back then. So that's been a major upheaval in pretty much all of our processes around how we do software development. And then introduction of web technologies and really all the new languages and just all the different technologies that were involved with doing something like that. So I think overall, all these items kind of point to the fact that, software is constantly evolving. It's not a static thing. So when the next thing comes out, we're kind of used to this evolution of change. So it's something that as developers, we just kind of accept it and look to kind of learn the next best thing and how we get to evolve and continue to get better.
And then specifically, what was different or dramatic about the kind of the Agile transformation from your perspective?
So pretty much, everything about it, just the concept of batching work up into small little pieces. And I've participated in helping roll out Agile with other teams. And, it's somewhat mind-blowing to these teams that you can take this big amount of work and you can even slice it up into 1 week or 1 day increments and check that in and have this daily accountability with my team members. And that test is now my responsibility. And how am I going to automate that? Because, as a developer, the developer mindset, we want to automate that test as much as possible. And just much more this integrated, fast-paced, all of us owning all the work and focusing on flow through the system.
I do remember that. It was like 2005. We had just started kind of our first experiments in Agile, and just even finishing something in a week was mind-blowing. That's how long it took us to fill out the PRD forms usually, right? So yeah, I remember that. So I love these amazing stories that you're sharing. So if you could just compare yourself now to the person you were 20 years ago, what were the most important and significant differences between yourself now and yourself then? What skills did you have to develop? Nicole, well, I'll start with you.
So timing on this is funny because I just got back from my 20-year high school reunion last weekend. And it was sort of an interesting time to sit and reminisce and think about what has changed in the last 20 years. And I mean, obviously technical skills needed developed, right? So 20 years ago, as you think back, there's no Facebook, there's no Twitter, there's barely email. It sort of existed, but not really. So, I mean, definitely all the technical skills, but for me also learning how to be a leader and how to interact with people and how to exert, I don't want to say exert really, but how to exert influence in kind of a soft power sort of a way, right? So again, going back and talking to people that I knew 20 years ago, there was learning how to do things in more of a nuanced sort of way, which you need to do when you're managing large projects, right? Which I did even 10 years ago, and seeing how things work differently now and see how I handle conflict differently now, which you need to do when you're managing more complex projects and more complex systems. For me, it's been a soft skills thing because we can, I always joke that technology is easy and people are hard, even as complex as technology can be. For me, I think that was probably my biggest piece.
And so many projects that we work on, right? They're all volunteer projects, right? So yet an even softer skill is even necessary, right? When everyone's volunteering their time. Great, Terry.
So 20 years ago, I was finishing up my last year in the Air Force, right? And doing some leadership things, but much more of an individual contributor. I had a good view of what it was like to be on the Air Force side, managing big contracts and testing systems in operations. But since then, I think that there have been a few things that I really had to develop. One was my network, right? The group of people that I learn from. And that has definitely grown and fortunately really sort of exploded in the last 4 years outside of Raytheon, right? I had a pretty good network within Raytheon, but once I met Eugene and started participating in DevOps Enterprise Summit and the forum, I just love how that career or that network has grown from there. And I also, I've always been interested in really staying with modern technologies and finding ways to make our teams more efficient. And so I think that's always going to be something that's changing, right? That you always have to stay on top of what's the latest thing that's helping your teams be more efficient.
Yeah.
So, and the agile transformation too, because definitely we were waterfall all the way in the Air Force and for the first several years that I was at Raytheon. So
that's so interesting that you mentioned network. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is almost everyone knows is, you're only as smart as the average of the top 5 people you hang out with. But I think it is interesting when you can actually bring that network to bear on to help other people with their problems, right? I mean, it becomes a really powerful, asset. And in the ideal, everyone says thank you. Dominica.
Well, I think 20 years ago, I assumed that everybody else knew what they were doing and that they were doing the right thing. and I tended to feel like I didn't know what I didn't know what was up. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was just inundated with trying to learn quickly. And I think now I recognize that most people, really don't know what they're doing. I mean, we all, nobody has all the answers, and that it's absolutely okay now to ask questions, and that in order to have your voice heard and become the voice of reason, how important metrics has been in order to present them in a way that others can understand, can better
Plus
understand.
One on metrics. I will cheerlead for metrics all day long.
Yeah, in order, I used to complain, I used to rant, we don't have automated testing, smoke tests take too long, and it just got me nowhere. But now being able to present data calmly and confidently, to be the voice of reason in the organization, is probably my greatest learning change over the last 20 years. That, and also learning much more about flow and lean and Kanban and different methods out there to bring. I mean, it's why I wrote my book, really, Making Work Visible, is to help others see how to become the voice of reason. I think that's super important.
Awesome. Yeah, the calm voice of reason. Excellent. Erica.
So I'll echo the comments made about people and relationships. And, I think in college, we don't get an understanding that there's non-technical problems in addition to the technical ones. And really, we all look at the world differently. And we're going to have to understand that everyone that we work with isn't going to have the exact same perception as us, and we need to partner together and get these diverse viewpoints, build these relationships, build these networks. That's something that I probably didn't get proper appreciation till maybe, you know, the midway through my career journey so far. And I just, you know, I wish someone had told me that earlier in my journey. And then I think appreciation for the ecosystem that we operate in. You know, I talked about when I first came out of school as a computer science graduate, I was focused on my view of the world and the code I was writing. And I thought the big picture was understanding what the rest of the developers on my team were working on, you know, not understanding how do we deploy this code? How do we maintain it? What's the infrastructure that we're running on? How does our customer use this code? All of those different sorts of things, which we work now to get that bigger picture for people, but that appreciation that bigger picture makes you good at your specific piece of that. And then just that need to continuously improve yourself. It's not about just being good with what you're doing right now. It's about looking at what's next. How can I continue to evolve myself and improve myself so that I can help move our company along?
Well said, Erica. Here.
But I can resonate with all elements of that. And by the way, just to share a story, I was talking to a developer once, a younger developer. He must have been like around 25, hanging out with a bunch of ops people. And I asked him, well, what are you doing here hanging out with a bunch of ops people? And he said something that I thought was hilarious, maybe not the most politic, but I couldn't fault his curiosity. He said, I just want to know where my code goes. To me, it's like I flush it down the toilet, and I've been doing it for 2 years. I just wonder where it goes, which I thought was unfortunate imagery. But man, he was like, the minority of developers actually caring about the system as a whole, which obviously made an impression on me. So let's talk. One of the things that, if we go back to the topic of change, one of the things I hear a lot these days is how people in our profession often feel very uncertain about their own future, and specifically about how to maintain their own relevance. I'm thinking of a person I met that I was actually able to interview on my blog, and he's my age, and despite having an MBA, despite having a master's in engineering management, despite being an expert in theory of constraints, despite being an operations lead at Boeing, he wrote asking for career advice, saying, what do I do to make sure that I am as relevant in 5 years as I am 5 years ago? Specifically, what advice would you give someone who's in operations and feeling like if they don't take drastic measures, they won't be as relevant, and what actions would you recommend? Carrie, why don't we start with you?
So I was thinking about this question, and so much of it depends on where he wants to take his career, right? So you have to know where you want to go in order to put together a plan for how to get there. So given all of his degrees and what he's doing, it doesn't seem like he really wants to go off and start re-architecting software, or it didn't sound to me like he would necessarily need to get a whole computer science degree. But if he wants to be really understand how the automation works, maybe he takes a few classes in Python or Ruby or one of the scripting languages to help with that and get involved with that. But it seemed like it would be pretty drastic to go off, because there's lots of opportunities to lead transformations, and he's got those leadership skills apparently. So I would say look for the opportunities that really fit with your personality and your skills, rather than going back to school for the answer.
Right. Indeed. And by the way, I just realized, sorry, Robin, I didn't, I forgot your answer. What advice would you give to yourself 20 years ago? What skills are most important? And then we'll get back to our friend, Pat Birkeland.
Okay.
Sorry, Pat.
So just like the others, I would say people and people skills. So I was really type A and really, kind of driven, building my code, and I thought the harder I worked, the more impact I would make. But as I got older, I learned really the more that I build people around me, the bigger impact I make, right? So being able to build those coworkers or people that work for me actually magnify that, tenfold. And it just didn't occur to me at that time. So I would really focus on what you share as opposed to what you know. We tend to get, rewarded for what we know, but if we rewarded people for what they share, you'd be amazed at what can happen.
Robin, one of the things that I found so impactful about your presentation, even just in this last London, was you shared the story about how you had created this very informal community of people just sharing, and you met weekly or monthly, and 15 years later, you're still meeting, and that you've all sort of ascended together. Am I misremembering that story?
No, we're actually still meeting, and we're building people. I think both me and Suzette are in the same boat, because at the same time we were looking for others that would help us, because we started Agile pretty early in our careers, and we really needed, any information. There just wasn't a lot. So kind of like-minded group to get together and kind of build each other.
Awesome. So, and I guess if I were to sort of speculate, all sort of very curious, all ambitious, all good at networking, and that's what a great collection of people to learn from, right? And collaborate with.
You're right. They're kind of drawn together.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin. So let's go back to this not fictitious Pat Birkeland, who he was so generous in writing up some of his thoughts and experiences. Terry, your advice was, you have to. The answer is not to go back to school, but maybe be more crystal clear about where he wants to go in his own career and find opportunities. I love that. Dominica, your thoughts on Pat Birkeland?
First of all, I could definitely relate, because I had the same thoughts myself earlier. I thought, oh man, I should go back and get my master's. I need another degree, I need more letters at the end. But really couldn't do that because working full time, little children at home, it's just really hard. I didn't have a nanny. And so I think that what somebody can do immediately is to learn the business better. Maybe just kind of go to the Gemba a bit from the business perspective and see what the business challenges and risks are, and then figure out how to reduce some of that risk, maybe by making things a little bit more predictable. That's going to be such a huge growth experience, to go around and maybe visit some of the other parts of the value stream and go look at the whole value stream and see where things are stuck, and look at making that flow and faster.
That's such interesting advice. By the way, it reminds me, like, one of the things I was always envious. If I had to do my career over again, I would have loved to spend a couple years at a Big Four audit firm, just because I was so envious of my friends who, could actually see the big value streams: procure to pay, order to cash. It was something I was so envious about. Just even the language they spoke in. That totally resonates with me, Dominica. Erica.
So one thing that I've told a number of our operations personnel that I've had this similar conversation with is, good people will always find a way to be successful. I'll hire good people any day, and they'll acquire those new skills. So when it comes to being nervous about the situation, I think as long as people are eager and willing to learn new things, they're going to be successful. And then we as companies need to set them up for success. So, I'd urge this person to talk with their manager, see if they have specific areas where they see that there's opportunities for improvement. And then, like Terry said, find your passion and invest in that particular area.
There's no shortage of problems to be solved, I think is what you're suggesting, Erica.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's actually great. That's great. Pat, I hope you're listening. I'll have this transcribed for you. Robin.
So the first thing I did after the DevOps Summit in London is to come back and tell everybody about Nicole's research, which stated that transformational leaders, right, really improve the likelihood of your success. We're short on those, so I would think being able to build those folks around them and really, drive help the technical folks get things across, understand the value stream, as Dominica said. I think there's plenty of work to be done there, and that would be amazingly helpful.
That's great. In fact, I mean, I do love the literature that says, these transformational leadership traits are, learned behaviors, not the old school was like, these are things you're born with, the great man theory, right? That you had to be born that way, otherwise, you're just not wired that way. I think that's so exciting. Nicole, on Pat Birkeland.
Yes. So I would start by asking, in an ideal world, right, what would Pat be doing in 6 months and in a year? And then work backwards, right? What's your ideal job? What do you want to be doing? And then what skills do you need? Because again, you take a look at what he's been doing, look at his credentials. He's got an MBA, he's a theory of constraints expert, he has a master's in engineering management. It sounds like he's set up to be doing incredible things right now in leading a technology transformation. If he wants to be doing that, he might need to brush up on 1 or 2 specifics of a new technology in order to really be able to speak to the developers or the operations staff on a few of his teams, but he might be there. And it's funny I say that, especially as I was listening to, what Dominica said, she wanted a master's so she could add letters. Some people walk up to me and they'll say, oh, I want a PhD because I have a PhD. And I'm like, why? And they look at me like I'm like I want to be the only one with a PhD. And I'm like, no, why do you want a PhD? Don't get a PhD just for fun. A PhD is a research degree. If, for example, if Pat says, I want to be doing research in 6 months or a year, it's going to take more than a year, then get a PhD. But if you want a PhD or if you want a degree because you want someone to know you have a degree, that's not the reason to get a degree. But if the job that you want in 6 months or a year is to be writing code, okay, then yeah, then you're going to need to either get a degree or do some Coursera or some Udemy or something. But if what you want to be doing in 6 months or a year is leading transformations, you've got it.
And
you're set.
There's so many easy ways to learn these days, and PhDs, just one of them. By the way, if I could just go back to this, and maybe this is more for me, right? I remember a point in my career, this must have been around 2005, right? And I hear all this talk about oh, it's so easy to learn things. Yeah, rah, change is good. I remember when Microsoft changed how it was their database interface. It would change from ODBC to ADO.NET, and the reaction I had was this is crap. I do not want to learn another way to access databases, right? This is horrible, right? There's and I had no appetite for that. I mean, I'm sure you might have encountered people who had that reaction. I mean, what advice would you give me in 2005? I'll take any advice from anybody. Otherwise, I'll call on.
I've had friends who, developers who have been extremely frustrated at the continual change in the learning. They feel like they learned something really good, right. And then it just all changes again, and how frustrating that was for them, and it made them want to go be a business analyst. But I think that is just the nature of the demand that's the reality that we live in, and that there's a need. We have to learn and adapt, and change is always there.
Right. I've had interesting reactions from people in our organization who seem to think that that learning something new is going to threaten their job, right? If you move to automated tests, then perhaps they won't have a job anymore. So it's always surprising to me when people don't want to learn, because learning is sort of what keeps me motivated and excited. Although sometimes, right? You feel maybe it's a step too far beyond what your current skills are. But yeah, there's lots of ways to do that these days, and to figure out. And if worse comes to worse, get a few of your colleagues or friends that are in a similar boat, and you all want to learn about the same thing, and go through a course or a book together, and maybe a group effort might make it a little more interesting, intimidating.
It always helps to have a buddy, is what I learned. Any other advice for Jean, 2005, who was enraged by ADO.net?
I would just say that it's constantly changing, and that if you're enraged by it, you're just gonna be unhappy all the time. It's almost like it's just a given. So you might as well try to learn to like it, or pretend you do.
Awesome, Robin.
Do you think, though, that there's this one thing that hasn't been talked about yet is this sense of fear that people have? They were really good at something, and they knew this technology, and they were the top of their, everybody went to them to ask advice on this one thing, and now that's changing. And so that's scary for a lot of people. Like, wow, just a year ago, I was awesome at this, and now everything's changed, and what the heck do I do now? I mean, look at some project managers now with the whole, coming out of waterfall and PMI and Gantt charts, and now all that's being shifted upside down, and where are they going to go now? So I think addressing that fear of what people used to be really good at and now that's gone is real.
Those are really good points, Dominica.
And by the way, I had no illusions that I was good at ODBC. I mean, I was barely competent. I felt like people were just randomly shuffling chairs just to force people to upgrade from Windows 95 or whatever. It was just, I saw no value in it. But I love that it is kind of a fact of life, and some things are genuinely miraculous. Like, who would want to go back to the old way? So one of the pieces, we did a webinar. It was on the topic of how to get your DevOps Enterprise submission accepted to the conference. And one of the people who was on that panel was Margot Cronin. She was an enterprise architect at Zurich Insurance. She's now at AWS. But we actually accepted her through the RFP process, and it was fantastic to see her perspectives and the advice that she gave. But one of the things that she said really made an impression on me. She said, have confidence that you have an interesting story to tell. I think she even said, just because you're not the lead developer using the new cutting edge technologies, that's not necessarily, as interesting as, someone who's helping drive behavior change and transformations in large organizations. Do you agree with her? And if so, what advice would you expound to anyone who has a story to share, but maybe are hesitant to? Let me call on you, Dominica. Oh, and Dominica, this is great because you're on the programming committee.
I hear this a lot. People don't feel like they have a story to share, but everybody does. It's a different perspective that they can bring. I mean, there's a lot of similar nuances that we all go through, but I think to hear, especially somebody that we haven't heard from before, a new, fresh perspective of their challenges always makes for an interesting story.
And maybe you can shed a little light on kind of the process, right? And we're looking at every one of these submissions, and we are looking for interesting stories.
So how many submissions did we have for San Francisco?
So over 250, almost 300.
Yeah. So going through all of those is a challenge. And one thing that I really look for is original, real wording, like people telling a real story and not shying away from using their own language. Like I don't think people should feel that they have to conform to using the book written perfect language in a submission. Just say what the real, what's the problem, why it matters, what they did about it, the real story. That's what I want to hear. What worked, what didn't work, what were some of the failures, and where they are right now and where they hope to go.
Great. Yeah, the level of deliberation. In fact, one of the things that maybe most people might not know is just the level of the intensity of some of these debates of who who we accept in the conference. I mean, it is sometimes gets very, very heated. I'm not sure if anyone's actually hung up and out of the meetings, but sometimes very close. Erica, how about you?
Yeah, so I actually had a conversation with a coworker of mine after we attended a local DevOps meetup here, and she said, I would love to at some point work towards a goal of presenting at this. And she actually comes from a non-technical background, and she's participated in a lot of the same things that I have in our DevOps journey. And I said, I think it would be so interesting to hear this same story told through your eyes, and I think it would be a different story than my version of it, and just kind of, the different things that stood out to you and were amazing to you. And so I really encouraged her, and I said, I'd like to hear this story, even just the two of us telling that same journey, different perspectives on that are very, very interesting.
And are you referring to the portion of the presentation you gave last year, which was when Dev Manager takes over Ops? Is it?
Yes. Yep.
I would love to hear that story. In fact, 3 of your colleagues actually did submit to the CFP, so I'm eager to see where that goes. Thank you for any encouragement that you gave them. Thanks, Erica. Robin?
So just like Erica, I think everybody has a story to tell, and through another person's eyes, it's a whole different perspective. So sometimes the things that we do every day seem so commonplace. It happens to me all the time. But then when you tell somebody else, they're like, wow, I didn't even know that existed, or how would you even do that? So I think, again, just having confidence in yourself and realizing you actually have something unique to tell other people is what you need to do.
Interesting. Thanks. Nicole.
Yes. So sometimes when I think about what might be a good topic to talk about when I go to conferences, I think about things that I do pretty commonplace or things that are pretty easy, and think about what used to not be super easy, right? If it's a process that I've done or a process or what we're kind of working through right now, and then what that journey has looked like, right? Because if I can do it now and it's pretty easy and it's almost habit or reflex, when was it not habit and reflex? And then how did I get here, right? What were the steps that I got here? Did we have a checklist? What were the crazy hurdles? Because if it's easy for me now, and it probably wasn't easy for me at some point, I had to learn to get there. That's probably going to be useful or at least interesting to someone. And then write that up. And then, so that's the story. But then writing it up, I think, is another piece. And like Dominica said, I'm on a bunch of program committees. So write it up so that when I'm reading 300 submissions or 1,000 submissions, it stands out to me and it's interesting, so I can tell you're going to have some kind of personality on stage. And let the audience know what they'll get out of it, so that when they read it in the brochure, they know like which talks to kind of go to, right? What takeaways am I going to get from this? Am I going to have a few tips and tricks? Am I going to know what to avoid? Am I going to know where to start? Like, those are kind of some tips in terms of like writing submissions. And sometimes I forget when I write my own submissions. So none of us are perfect.
Awesome.
Keep trying. I mean, I still get CFPs rejected. We all do.
No, so true. Terry Potts. Yeah,
I do this a lot with people in my organization, because moving up the career chain at Raytheon often requires you, if you want to stay technical, to start presenting first maybe internally within Raytheon and then externally. And so
I love that.
Yeah, so a lot of times people think, wow, what I do, that's boring. So I try to just have a conversation with them to get them to tell me some of the things that they've done recently. And some of the things I really like to hear about is, okay, so you started using Puppet or you started using Chef. Did that just go perfectly the first time? Well, no, we tried this and that didn't work, so then we did this. And So I'm like, other people would love to hear that so they don't make those same mistakes. So, write something up to say, these are things that we found that work really well. And these are things that we found that didn't work so well. So don't repeat those mistakes.
That's great. In fact, I mean, as a professional conference goer, I mean, one of my favorite variants is like the internal technology conferences, because there's just a whole bunch of shared context that's already shared, and there's a mercenary reason why you want to help people within your own organization that isn't present in a more industry-wide conference. I mean, I just really, I got to attend the one at Capital One and at Nationwide Insurance, and I just, they really stand out in my memory as just incredibly unique experiences, and so great for internal technologists to be able to show off the amazing things they've done. All right, we're almost out of time. One last question. I think the theme that's come up over and over again is we're lifelong learners. Learning is part of the game. In this game that we're playing, right? Learning is definitely a part of it, whether we like it or not. Hopefully we like it far more than we don't. What are your top resources for learning? Maybe answer two ways, kind of all time, and maybe right now here in the moment. So Erica, let's start with you.
Sure. So of all time, once upon a time, I had like my C++ book, and I referenced that back before I really even used Google. So there was those sorts of things. But much more recently, I rely heavily on Twitter. And a lot of the things that I see on Twitter and on leaders in the DevOps space, and what are they reading? What are things that they're tweeting about? There's obviously books like the DevOps Handbook. There goes my lights again. And the Phoenix Project. And I try to read probably about one book at a time. But then I like to just see what's going on in space. I'll see there's a conference going on, and I'll go look and look for that conference and what's going on with that conference and the slides that are coming out of that. And that kind of helps me stay current. And then just rely on coworkers as well. They'll send out emails and different articles that they've read.
That's awesome. Robert, by the way, one of the things I just want to punctuate is several of you mentioned, it always helps to learn with coworkers. I mean, I remember teaching myself JavaScript and React, and it was incredibly gratifying, but it was horrible beyond words, because, even like there were like 40 tools I had to learn what they were, and I actually didn't care. It always helps to have a buddy in learning things. I love that pattern. Thank you, Erica. Robin, top resources for learning.
So I follow Twitter just like our counterpart here. I am a big fan of LinkedIn, so I read LinkedIn and read, kind of the latest things there. I have a membership to Safari Books, so they always have the latest technology books, which I just love. And I read the blogs. It's interesting because you get so many different perspectives on the different blogs. You hear, kind of what Mike Cohn thinks is cool, and Ken Schwaber, and then you turn around and hear David Anderson, and maybe they don't all play nice in the sandbox, but it's interesting to hear what they have to say.
It's interesting. And Twitter, it is interesting. I mean, I always used to dismiss it as a toy, but more and more I find it so interesting. Just to some of the most interesting reading comes from what what my friends are reading. So interesting, Robin. Nicole.
So for my overall best learning, it's probably my PhD, because it taught me how to do a lot of critical thinking, statistical thinking, pulling things apart, how to design and critically pull apart research and think about things in a really concrete, consistent, detailed way. And then overall in today, Twitter, news sites, I try to make sure I keep it as well-rounded as possible. So New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Al Jazeera, and I try to keep up on what my friends are reading, but then I also try to occasionally do a random search to get exposure to things that my friends aren't reading.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Terry?
Let's see. So for all time, I mean, I've kept a membership for IEEE and ACM for years, just trying to keep track of what's going on. But now things are a lot more electronic. So I some of the things I do regularly is I try to listen to most of the SE Daily, Software Engineering Daily podcast episodes, and also the SE-org podcasts, which they've had a tremendous amount of podcasts that I've found really, really useful. And of course, I do go to a few conferences every year, so I've learned a lot at DevOps Enterprise Summit. And this year, I presented at the SEI's Architecture and Technology User Network Conference, Saturn. And it was really, really good to see the amount of architecture work going on around figuring out how to transform legacy systems and architect for automation, essentially.
Oh, that's great. And by the way, I echo your endorsement of the Software Engineering podcast. They have great people on there. They had others on recently.
And I'll plus one on IEEE and ACM. ACMQ has been really fantastic lately.
Oh, yes. And then last is Dominica.
Yeah. I've learned so much from watching TED Talks. That's one of the greatest sources of learning for me for years now. I mean, Hans Rosling, Let My Data Set Change Your Mindset. In 20 minutes, what you can learn from that. Or David McCandless and The Beauty of Data Visualization, just phenomenal. And then the DevOps Enterprise Summit videos over the last 4 or 5 years are, on the tech side, great learning resources right up on YouTube, easy to get to.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a YouTube channel. You can just subscribe to it, and you'll be notified whenever there's a new one. In fact, I was going through them last night. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much. I so much appreciate your time and you sharing all of your experiences. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I think we're actually going to be writing this up so that people can actually access it in written form and the summary of it. So I look forward to seeing you all soon, one way or another, at the very latest at DevOps Enterprise in San Francisco. I hope you've learned as much as I have today. So thank you to all the panelists who are doing amazing work in all your respective organizations. And you will be able to see them too at November 13th to the 15th at DevOps Enterprise in San Francisco. It's at the Hilton Union Square location, and look for updates on the website at events.itrevolution.com. In fact, we'll be announcing more speakers the next week or two as we start processing the CFP submissions. And just a reminder, last reminder, early bird ticket pricing ends on July 31st, so be sure to register soon for a 20% discount. With that, thank you so much, Erica Morrison, Robin Yeaman, Nicole Forsgren, Terry Potts, and Dominica. See you next time, all.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye, Jean.
Bye.
Thank you.